News that a senior Hamas leader was reportedly assassinated in the middle of the night in a foreign country. It has created both fear and uncertainty in what was already an incredibly unstable situation in the Middle East. The fear you can read for yourself. Escalating violence, concern over a wider war, threats of retaliation, and defiance. But there's a great deal of uncertainty because some of the most pressing questions we have, what happened, who's responsible, and what will this mean? None of these questions has a clear, definitive answer. But in the 24 hours since the reported assassination, we have learned some important details, and I'll take you through them. The story starts with this man, Ismail Haniyeh. Joined Hamas in the late 1980s during the first Intifada. For decades, he built standing and rose through the ranks, becoming political chief of Hamas in 2017. In 2018, the US branded him a specially designated global terrorist, a proponent of armed struggle, including against civilians. But Haniyeh also built a reputation as a pragmatist, a man who could negotiate for Hamas, the face of international diplomacy. This is him in a recent meeting with Iran's Ayatollah. Haniyeh was reportedly instrumental in ongoing talks between Israel and Hamas for a ceasefire deal. At about 2 a.m. local time, an Iranian state news agency reports the building he was in was hit by what it called an airborne guided projectile.
Was it a missile strike? Was it an airstrike? Was it a quadcopter strike? A strike from outside the country? None of that is clear.
But at this point, there's little else than local media reports to go on. We know Haniyeh was in Tehran at the time, attending the swearing-in ceremony of the country's president. Both Hamas and Iran's Revolutionary Guard say he and one of his bodyguards were killed. And they've put the blame squarely on Israel, without immediately providing any evidence, in a statement making references to the crimes of the Zionist regime. Israel itself has avoided commenting on this at all, even with Netanyahu making a televised address just hours ago, nearly a full day after the apparent attack.
ימים מאתגרים לפנינו. מאז התקיפה בביירות נשמעים איומים מכל עבר. אנחנו ערוכים לכל תרחיש. ישראל תגבה מחיר כבד מאוד על כל תוקפנות נגדנו מכל זירה שהיא.
He spoke about Iran's axis of evil, cited several Israeli strikes against Houthi, Hezbollah, and Hamas targets, told Israelis to be prepared for retaliation, but he didn't mention at all anything about the most recent strike in Iran.
Israel is looking to widen the aperture, having not yet fully met its objectives in the Gaza war, and tried to degrade in a much more meaningful way the presence and posture of the axis of resistance. So this strike that took out Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran really is carefully choreographed.
Israel rarely responds to accusation that it's been involved in military operations or targeted assassinations. It leaves that to the kind of deduction.
It doesn't matter if Netanyahu publicly announces it or not. He was clear that they would protect Israeli interests and go against Hamas leadership no matter where they are.
Since the October 7th attacks last year, Israel has repeatedly vowed to eradicate Hamas. It has also repeatedly targeted its senior leaders in intelligence, in its political wing. Within the first few weeks, the IDF released this list, published by several media outlets, of named high-ranking members of Hamas it had killed. But if Israel is behind the assassination, the US, as Israel's closest ally, immediately made clear it had no idea.
This is something we were not aware of or involved in. It's very hard to speculate.
But what we can say for certain is that Iran sees what happened as an incredibly provocative assault, and it's promised to punish Israel for it. The death of a Hamas leader on Iran's soil, that is seen by many experts as deeply embarrassing for the country.
I think it demonstrates that Iran has pretty big gaps, pretty big weaknesses, that the Israelis can strike in the heart of Iran and knock out high-value targets at their leisure.
So there are two big concerns over what comes next. One short-term, one long-term. Iran says it has a duty to take revenge, with the president himself saying Israel will regret what it's done. So the immediate question, what does retaliation from Iran actually look like? If you cast your mind back to April, when an Israeli strike targeted Iran's consulate in Syria, killing several members of Iran's Revolutionary Guard, including 2 generals.
A reported deadly Israeli airstrike in Syria.
Iran immediately promised revenge, and it did retaliate in a way we had never seen before.
For the last several minutes, we've seen these flares streaking all across the skies over Jerusalem. And now, for the first time, we're hearing the air raid sirens.
Iran launched hundreds of drones and missiles, all timed to strike Israel simultaneously. Now, these are 2 different situations. In one case, Iran was attacked directly, albeit on foreign soil. Now we have a case of Hamas being attacked on Iran's soil. But could history repeat itself? How do we measure Iran's rage?
So there are a whole variety of options. There's the direct option, of course, in terms of trying to hit Israel again, but Iran may not try to do something that bold. So it may try something from, one of the members of the so-called axis of resistance in another country.
I think that we can count on the Iranians responding, but I think it's something short of an all-out war between Iran and Israel.
But the other concern over what comes next has very much to do with the longer-term prospect for peace between Israel and Hamas. If Hamas believes Israel has just assassinated one of its key political leaders, a key negotiator in the ongoing talks over hostages and a ceasefire, what does this do to any possibility that those talks succeed?
It certainly compromises those negotiations for the time being. I don't see any meaningful, long-standing solution on the horizon.
Ismail Haniyeh had been the most important interlocutor with the international community when it came to issues of war and peace for the Palestinian militant movement. But Hamas has a deep bench, and there are others who can take his place. The question is how quickly.
By all accounts, at minimum, the death of Ismail Haniyeh complicates talks. The Prime Minister of Qatar, which has played a central role in bringing both sides together, appeared to accuse Israel outright, asking, how can mediation succeed when one party assassinates the negotiator on the other side?
So his death is a major blow, at least short term, to international efforts both to end the war in Gaza and win freedom for the hostages, as well as to prevent a wider war in the Middle East.
Again, Israel has not commented directly on the attack or whatever its role may have been, but it will almost certainly be aware of how much more dangerous the ongoing war has now become. Just hours earlier, Israel's deadly strike against a Hezbollah commander in Beirut raised many of the same concerns the world has right now, and in that case too, Hezbollah has sworn to Israel it will pay.